right. I think we're live. Getting a ton of dropped frames. Wait for the thumbs up from the wife. Yep. Okay, looks like we're back. Ah, look at that. Thumbs up. Hi, wife. All right. Hello, everyone. So we'll give everyone a second to get settled. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. In theory, my headphones are working this week, but in practice, I don't think they are. So I'll just rely on the wife-o-meter to tell me if the levels are off, or in the chat. Feel free to post and let me know. So hello, everyone. Let everyone get settled. So while people are kind of getting themselves moved in a little bit of background on the stream. So each week we pick a different national park and explore it together. This week we're exploring White Sands National Park in New Mexico. For those of you with a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 edition, I've uploaded the flight plan today for you to follow along. I've also researched the park in preparation and added any new information about the park to the page with sources, to the Wikipedia page with sources. Now, why Wikipedia? There's two main reasons for this. One, it's a way to make sure that the facts here are checked by others, so peer review on the different pieces of information. The other reason is it gives back to a living body of knowledge, something that'll go beyond our hour together here. To that end, if you notice anything that's incorrect or should be clarified, please help fix the Wikipedia pages. As the wiki community often says, be bold and make the updates. Also, we'll be voting near the end for the next national park we'd like to explore together. So look out for that and other posts coming out in the chat. Also, feel free to post questions or thoughts or anything as we fly around. I'm increasingly better at checking the chat, and I love to hear what you're seeing or thinking about it. A little disclaimer before we get much further. Yes, I am a pilot, but we'll be taking full advantage of the simulator for today's flight, so don't try these sorts of things at home. Without further ado, I'm Jules Altus, and I'll be your pilot for today. So sit back, relax, and let's explore White Sands National Park. And with that, let's see if we can do ourselves a little takeoff here. So today we're flying what's called a Fractals. So Fractals put up that flight plan. Today we're flying a DA-20 Katana. It's a fun little plane. Apparently it's the plane that people who fly planes all the time, when they want to go out for a fun joyride, this is the one they want to take. So, chat. Fractals, those that the game can follow. Hello, first time here. Try to follow in Microsoft Flight Sim with your flight plan. Awesome, Flying Singer. That would be great. And I'm in the USA West or West USA server, so I hope to see you in there. You should be. I think it'll drop us in the same end of the runway, but I'm over at Spaceport America is the airport that we're taking off from. I'll talk a little bit about these as we go. All right, so let's see if we can get rolling here. So Fractals had a really good suggestion to do a little countdown for the first 5 minutes before the stream. So I'll try and look into adding something like that before. That way people have a couple of minutes to sort of settle in and get everything in place before we actually start flying around. Maybe like 5 minutes or so beforehand. Right. About 5,000 feet up, so takeoff's a little tricky. So off on the left here, you can see that building is the Spaceport America building. This is, if I remember correctly, was the first spaceport in the country. I really should have grabbed a couple of fun facts about this one. We've got plenty to talk about already with White Sands, but Spaceport America is kind of cool. Also, the concept of a spaceport is kind of cool too. All right, thanks, Fractal. So, quick poll about the park. How many of you have been to the White Sands National Park before? Yes, in the last 10 years, or before 10 years ago. Yes, once upon a time, or not yet. See if I can get this plane all trimmed up here. It's a fun plane, but it's a finicky plane. We're gonna do this. Oh, it's going. So to prep for this one, I ended up learning more about throttle control, which Flying Singer, if you're an avid pilot, you may have worked with. Constant speed propellers, I'm a little bit newer to it, so kind of making it work as we go. All right, a couple quick administrative updates before we dive in. Shout out to Gunnerman for his scenery fixes in White Sands. So if you're using the flight sim, I highly recommend grabbing his scenery fixes. They remove a bunch of buildings that aren't actually there. They're just sort of placed around randomly. Another small kind of fun fact, there is an act called the One Small Step to Protect Human Heritage in Space Act, and that went into effect on New Year's Eve of this last year. So today we'll be talking about a lot of things related to space, and you'll see why pretty soon. This one I thought was kind of a fun one to kick off with, because this Space Act it's a first of its kind legal protections for the Apollo sites, which make NASA's preservation of those sites part of the requirement for future activities on the moon. So if you think about it, it would be very appealing for a tourist to go and kind of poke around the footprints of the Apollo astronauts. And so this act is to protect against that sort of activity, kind of in the spirit of some of the things that we talk about with the national parks as well. All right, coming up to about 5,000. So I'm going to trim up the plane here and let's dive in. I've been there. Stacey, you've been to White Sands? I think I've been there too, actually. I think it was more than 10 years ago, though. Because I distinctly remember sledding there, which we'll talk a little bit about too, but sledding in the park is a pretty cool activity you can do. All right, let's see. So yes, in the last 10 years for 2 votes. We have Once Upon a Time for 1 vote, so I'd be in that category, and then Not Yet, 1 vote. So that Not Yet, it's a cool park. Hopefully you'll be excited to go and visit by the time we finish. So while we're making a long traversal, and I'll show you a little bit about the flight plan, we have a couple of legs that we're going to be doing here. Flip over to this iPad. Trying to connect to the TV. Sounds good, Rosita. So we're going to be doing kind of fly across the mountains, and then we'll enter into the park. We'll fly through kind of across the park and then exit through the north of the park. We'll see a little bit more of that as we go. So what is the park? Let's look at... There's this great overview of the park video that I found, and there's actually 2 versions of it. There's sort of the nominally for adults version, where it's the same park ranger in a very monotone voice explaining the different aspects of the park and what makes it unique. And then there's one of the greatest videos I've seen in a while. Wow is the only way I can describe it. And it really does a good job of actually hitting all of the key parts about what make the park unique and why it exists. Let me pull this up real quick. Let's see.
Yeah. What's a good one?
Wow, that was great. Most people around here know that you can go sledding at White Sands National Monument, but there are a lot of other wild things too. It's the only place like it on Earth. It is truly unique. My name is Eugene Ibarra, and I'm a park ranger here at White Sands. I'm going to tell you about where the white gypsum sand came from. Picture me at the bottom of the sea, because 250 million years ago, where I'm standing was at the bottom of the sea.
Okay, so super quick, and hopefully I didn't pause right in the middle, but this shark is called a let me see which other down. It's like a helicron, Heliocorprion, which I'd never heard of before. They think the teeth actually go in the mouth, not out of the mouth, but quick sidebar, this is sort of what they thought it looked like for a long time.
The bottom of the sea. I can't even imagine that many years ago. Can you? Our sugar-like sand is made of gypsum. Most people know gypsum as a rock or a crystal. Gypsum is rarely found as sand. The huge amount of sand here is a result of the sea covering this area for millions of years. Wow! I just jumped ahead 180 million years. The sea is long, long gone. It is now 70 million years ago when the Rocky Mountains formed. That jump puts me 30 million years ago. The land that White Sands is on, now sinks down about 9,000 feet. The area that sinks becomes a Tularosa Basin and becomes like a bathtub without a drain. That means that the water that comes into this basin stays on this basin until it evaporates. There is no river to carry the gypsum away. This special bathtub without a drain is one of the very few basins that was covered by an ocean for hundreds of millions of years. It is another wow. Now we're about 24,000 years ago. The climate was cooler and wetter. A huge lake covered a big part of the Tularosa Basin. Mammoths, giant camels and sloths and direwolves live here. They lived in a much and wetter and colder place than what the Tularosa Basin is like today. All the rain washed the gypsum from the mountains down to the huge lake and it stayed there. Turns out there was a lot of gypsum in that water. That's a wow. Around 10,000 years ago, the huge lake dried up. That left behind a lot of selenite, which is gypsum in crystal form. Wow! Selenite is so soft, it can be scratched by a fingernail. The crystals break into smaller and smaller pieces. Eventually they are small enough to be blown by the wind. 7,000 years ago, the gypsum dunes started to form. Wow, that's a lot of sand. Here is the biggest wow for today. The combination of this land being under the sea, the land becoming a bathtub without a drain, the huge lake collecting lots of gypsum that washed out the mountains, that huge lake drying up when the climate got hotter, and the selenite crystals being broken down into sand. All of this has resulted in the biggest gypsum sand dune field on Earth. No other gypsum dune field even comes close in size. Wow! So now you know there's a whole lot more to white sands than sledding. And there's even more to learn about this unique place. The special plants and animals, all kinds of amazing things. Hope your class can visit us soon, either on a field trip or by computer. We can promise you you'll have fun. See you later.
Okay, hopefully that was enjoyable. I'm seeing in the chat that people also loved the little ranger video. I was very, very amused. And you can imagine my disappointment when I came across the kind of monotone version, you know, the jumping across time versions for everyone. Wow. Okay, so that pretty much covered all of the parts that I want to highlight in the park. The only other thing that I mentioned, it was designated originally the White Sands National Monument in 1933, and then it was redesignated as a national park in 2019. So this is, I believe, the second most recent national park to be added, and we visited Gateway Arch National Park. I'm sorry, third most recent, because there's another one that just got added, which is the New River Gorge. So, yeah, so 2019 it was redesignated as a national park. It is the most visited national park site in New Mexico at 600,000 visitors each year. And the park features a drive from the visitor center to the heart of the dunes, picnic areas, backcountry camping, marked hiking trails. You can also go sledding on the dunes. You saw him carrying a sled and doing a little bit of sledding at the beginning. That looks like a blast. There's also ranger-guided orientation and nature walks throughout the park. The only thing that's good to be aware of is because it's right next to the White Sands Missile Range, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the park can be sometimes closed down if they're doing testing of new missiles. It sounds like that doesn't happen very often, and they're supposed to give at least 24 hours notice, hopefully more. A little bit of relationship between the military and the park going on there. But it's good to make sure that you check into if there's closed. A lot of gypsum in the water. Yeah, right. Wow. Every time I was like, was he going to do another wow? Visit us by computer. Yeah, visit us by computer. I hadn't thought of that kind of way of explaining it. I guess that's kind of what we're doing here, huh? I actually reached out to someone in Big Bend National Park when we were first starting, and asked about, you know, is there any concern with me doing explorations of the park? Is there any kind of like information I should know or anything? And his whole thing was sort of like, no, it's all public domain. You're all welcome to do kind of whatever you want. I was pretty excited about it. I think this kind of virtual visiting is a fun idea. I really thought the Gateway Arch National Park leaned into that really well with some of their media. All right, so we're cruising at about, what, 7,000 feet, so we're a little bit higher than we need to be, but that's okay. All right, fractals. You want to take us into our first topic of the day? So I mentioned that we're right next to the White Sands Missile Range, and so I thought a great topic to cover would be rockets. So the poll question, thank you, fractals. What is Newton's third law of motion? What starts... thank you, fractals. Okay, so there's no reason that you would know this necessarily, but I typically will write the polls and all that kind of stuff. Fractals threw a curveball on me. I like that one. Fractals, that's much better. Thank you. Okay, what starts with motion ends with emotion. Hashtag relationships. Newton's third law. It's really just the same as the first and second laws. Newton was big on rebranding. Or with every action, force, there's an equal and opposite reaction, force. So Newton's third law of motion. And the reason we talk about Newton's third law of motion is that is one of the core principles by which you can launch a rocket. So while people are answering that poll, let's kind of think about if you wanted to get into space, what would you need? Like if you were going to run the space shuttles, for instance. Basically what you need is a lot of force pushing you upwards, right? And a rocket is a way to create that force. So the rocket itself is a missile, spacecraft, aircraft, or other vehicle that obtains thrust from a rocket engine. So we're going to be talking today about rockets. When I say rockets today, I typically mean rocket engine, although the rocket itself is actually the vehicle and everything else. So a missile is a rocket, a spacecraft is a rocket. We're talking about rocket engines mostly. Put those up. Sorry for the curveball popped in my head and I had to. No, fractals, you're always welcome to. I love it. I was reading it and I'm like, I don't remember writing that. That's much funnier than what I had. He added the relationship one. Okay, so what is a rocket? I grabbed a picture. This is from a missile that was being tested in White Sands Missile Range. So you can see this is kind of a classic look for a rocket. And we'll talk about how these sorts of things work. So the rocket engine exhaust is formed primarily from a propellant carried within the rocket. Talk about both those things a little bit more in a moment. So the rocket engine works by action when the exhaust is shot out of the rocket, that pushes the other side of the rocket in the other direction, which is Newton's third law of motion. So fractals, you want to do the poll results here? See how we did. So Newton's third law of motion then is that every action force has an equal and opposite reaction or force, and you'll see a lot of different variations on that same sort of wording, but that's the kind of basics on it. See, one for hashtag relationships. That's fair. Rebranding, another vote. Yep. But it looks like, yeah, most people got it. That's the third law of motion, is the equal and opposite reaction. So a rocket engine is one thing that's different from a rocket engine different between a rocket engine instead of like a jet engine is that a jet engine is able to use air. And so a rocket, though, needs to work in space. And so if you need your rocket engine to work in space, then you can't rely on air, which is a critical part of combustion, that kind of when you'd like light a fire, for instance. So a car engine or a plane engine, like the one we have here, would both work just fine as a combustion engine because we have oxygen all around. But a rocket needs something different, needs something additional to make that combustion occur. All right, so question for the chat. As I was researching this, the space shuttle came up a lot. Has anyone seen the space shuttle in real life? They haven't been some of there's, I guess, 2 now. And they haven't been some of or there's 2 ones that went into space and then a 3rd one that was a demo one. Has anyone seen them in real life? I got a chance to a couple of years back, and I remember being blown away by the tiles, actually. That was what struck me the most, because it didn't seem like they should be able to withstand the entry back into the atmosphere. It seemed like quite a bit of heat. Got to see the shuttle launch from Cape Canaveral when I was a kid. It was amazing to see it in person. You got to see the shuttle launch. Fractals continue to impress me. How was that? How was the shuttle launch? Was it super loud? That's one of the things that was interesting. We'll talk about sonic sounds in here, but I have to imagine it was just like deafeningly loud. So Endeavour launch, STS 118 in 2007. It was awesome. I bet that was cool. Flying Stinger, that's awesome. Yeah. I was looking for some media around this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of cool ones that come up. Both my sisters cried even though yeah. Me and both my sisters cried even though I had earplugs in. Oof. Okay, yeah. Flying Singer's probably tougher than that. Didn't need earplugs to stop the crying. Maybe tears of joy. Okay, so propellant. We talk about needing a propellant because we don't have oxygen to deal with. And then the other part of a rocket is the nozzle, and this is what directs the flow of the exhaust in such a way that it accelerates it as much as possible. That acceleration then is what provides the force to launch the rocket upwards. Before we get too much further on rockets, let me pull up. So this is a view of where we are right now in the park, and I'm actually going to pause this briefly. So this is sort of what it looks like facing, so we're over on the entering kind of from actually probably this mountain pass. And you remember from the video he mentioned that the water runs off the mountains and then it can collect in the lakes down here. In the ancient lake it would have been much larger, but there's a Lake Lusario we'll pass over, which is just off to our right here. And then the wind pushes it over to the heart of the dunes. So we're going to be flying in and around here. I'll turn my map so you can kind of orient yourself. So that's sort of the direction we're going. And north is this way from this. So if we look then out the window, Lake Lusario is right over there, and you can see a little bit of the white sands out there. Let me pop out of the plane and see if we can get a better view. Now you'll see as we're coming around. Oops, let me flip over so you can actually see. So there's a little bit of the white sands over there. All right, let's keep flying around. So we're off to Lake Lusario. Visual. Oh, I see. Okay. Did I get it already? Okay, cool. Thanks. I got a cue card from the wife saying visual, but I think I caught it. Thank you. Appreciate it. So back to rockets. So we have a propellant. Your propellant in your rocket can be is typically a chemical propellant. So there's other ways that you can do it, but typically it'd be a chemical. Of those, you're often going to see a liquid or a solid propellant. So a solid propellant is easier to store and work with, but you can't start it once you stop it. So as soon as you ignite the propellant, then it's going to burn through whatever it has. So it's a really good choice for maybe an initial stage of your rocket launch, which is why the space shuttle used them for these, which you may recognize. So these are on the side of the space shuttle for takeoff. This is all solid propellant. And that's because once they're lit, then they can just burn all the way through, and then they just drop off with the rocket. So what does this look like on the inside? A simplified diagram of the solid fuel rocket. There's 5 different parts that they label on here. So first there's the solid fuel oxidizer mix. This is the propellant that gets packed into the rocket. This is number 1. Then 2 on here is some kind of igniter that ignites the surface of the propellant. There's a cylindrical hole that then acts as the combustion chamber, so where it's all going to combust. And then the hot exhaust goes out the engine at the back here. We'll talk a little bit more about the nozzle in a minute, and then it comes out as exhaust here. So there's your solid fuel rocket. Ignites up here, burns through all the fuel in here, and then shoots at the back. All right, let's flip back over to Lake Lusario, get a nice little view. It sounds like this lake is dried up most of the year, so in the game it seems to be a very big lake, but in a real visit it sounds like you may or may not see water in it, or if you do, it'll be really shallow anyway, but it's kind of pretty. And then you can see the white sand dunes off our left wing here. Love this like surround glass in this. There's our mountains in the background. Okay, making our way to the visitor center. Okay, so that was solid fuel for a rocket. Now liquid fuel is another option that you have, which is more expensive, but you could throttle it as you're using it. So unlike the solid fuel, which is going to burn all the way through, liquid you could actually change how much you're letting through. Didn't know it was a lake in the park. Yeah, so Stacy, it's apparently it's ephemeral, and it'll be there for certain times of the year. I couldn't get a good gauge on if it's more often than not there, but it sounds like it's usually not a lake. Usually it's just kind of that crystal, the selenite crystal. I don't know if I got the right crystal there, but the gypsum crystals those are typically what you would find here. So that's kind of what the coloring off the side here, right on the lakeshore, would be that sort of stuff. And then that breaks up and becomes the white sands. They do, I believe, do a ranger-led tour over there, though. So if you're back in the neighborhood sometime, you can go and check that out. All right, so a liquid propellant, again, you can throttle it as you're using it if you want. And so you might want to use that for something like the actual, the main fuel of your space shuttle, because then you can choose how much of it you're going to expend at what parts of your launch. So that's what they did with this. So this external tank, and I should pull up a picture of the. I don't think I have a picture of the space shuttle, actually. What's the easiest way to do that? Well, anyway, that's all right. Well, we'll see it in just a second. So, but that's this external tank contains liquid fuel. So the solid fuel is in those side boosters, which fall off right away after they burn through, and then this one contains the liquid fuel that burns. So let's look at a simple overview of the liquid rocket. So this is sort of what this looks like. Same sort of nozzle exhaust at the end. You have some sort of combustion chamber that then is burning these two. And essentially what you have is your liquid rocket fuel, and then you have your oxidizer, which in a combustion engine, like your car, that would just be the oxygen in the air. But again, in space, you need something else. So you combine your fuel and your oxidizer, and then pumps pull those two together into a combustion chamber, and then that shoots off your rocket. So inside the external tank here, there's actually a similar sort of set of regions to it that's just storing different types of fuel that then get pumped into the space shuttle. So the propellant combusts, pushes against the rocket, and then all of the force from the propellant combusting gets redirected out the nozzle this way. So that's the other piece of the magic going on behind the rocket. You have your propellant, which is going to provide the fuel, and then you have your nozzle, which is directing it for maximum force. This nozzle shape is called de Laval, and if anyone's a rocket scientist, apologies for my pronunciation on these ones. But this sort of shape and structure is very, very common in rockets. You've seen them, every single picture of a rocket that we've shown so far has something very similar to that. And the reason for it is it maximizes the velocity of the exiting exhaust. So as it moves through this shape, the exhaust is getting accelerated and accelerated until it hits a maximum velocity at the very end here. So that's sort of the reason that you see that design everywhere. We're gonna, and if for those of you who play Kerbal Space Program, it's probably a good one. Sup Scott, fun fact, the orange stuff is on, as the installation broke off, damages the shuttle. The orange stuff on the outside of the external tank, Sup Scott, is that what it is? That's the insulation part. I know that was what was a problem for a lot of launches, was the insulation falling off. Okay. Yep, okay. Oh, there you go. I didn't realize it was the orange stuff. I don't know what I thought it was, but that totally makes sense. I'd be curious why it's orange. Maybe a different stream. We'll talk about insulation or something. The invention of the shape. Is the invention of that shape what the movie October Sky is about? Stacy, I have not seen October Sky. I read the book a long time ago, but I don't remember. Maybe someone else in the chat knows that one. All right, so skipping over a lot of literal rocket science, which I attempted my best to learn, but I am not a aerospace engineer. The kind of goal with the design and the final exhaust shape that you want is you want that exhaust to match the ambient pressure as it leaves. Okay, so as your exhaust is leaving, you want it to be leaving at such a speed and compression that it matches the ambient temperature of the air around you. The problem you run into is that your ambient pressure decreases as you go up in altitude. So as you go from the surface of the Earth into space, you're losing air pressure the entire time. So we deal with that in the plane all the time. Because of that, the optimal shape of the nozzle changes as you go from lower altitudes to higher altitudes. So then you have a problem. What are you going to do? Because you have to deal with both the lower altitudes and the higher altitudes of space. All right, with that cliffhanger, let's take a look out our window. So this is the White Dunes. So we're going to go to the visitor center, but this is sort of what it looks like. And you can see there's kind of the edge of the dunes, and there's some really interesting biology that occurs there, kind of this side of the dunes as well. You can see the wind as it's sort of blowing over the sand. But then the heart of the dunes is this white area here. This is where a lot of the car drive goes and things like that. I can zoom in on the park map a bit so you can see where we are. All right. See if that looks up. My grandpa helped me design the canonical nozzle, and they helped design that. Your grandpa helped design the canonical nozzle on the Apollo missions? Fractals? Sometimes I wonder if you're just making this up. Are you serious? That's crazy. I also like that was it your uncle lives in Alaska and your grandpa's like trying to get into space? Like everyone's just really pushing themselves away. Okay, yep, my dad's side. His stories are wild. Yeah, crazy. All right, cool. All right. So let me do one quick pan over here just to see, and then we'll drop down a little bit to the visitor center here. So you have this problem. You need a nozzle that's one shape when you're at low altitudes and a nozzle that's a different shape at high altitudes. Essentially what you have to decide is, they do make fancy ones that can change shape apparently, and that was a rabbit hole that I didn't have enough time to really get into. But you really need to decide what you want to target for your final shape of the nozzle. So you have a couple of choices. You can have it be that the nozzle entry is too tight, which would be underexpanded, and so the exit pressure is greater, and you can kind of see that it is sort of flowing out the sides here. You can have it be the perfect size, in which case everything it reaches ambient temperature, it's coming out directly as it should. It can be overexpanded, and then it detaches a little bit here, or it can be grossly overexpanded. And grossly overexpanded essentially can cause a lot of other issues of stability kind of up at the throat here, which is a whole different sort of set of problems. What they decided to do, well, let's tie this back to our space shuttle, right? So we're designing a space shuttle. We have our solid rocket fuel that we're going to have on our boosters on the side. Yep, let me quick peek out the window here. So this is the visitor center, just out our left wing here. And then there's an entrance to the park just right there. We'll curve our way back around here. So what they decided to do, and we'll follow the drive that you would do when you go to the park. So what they decided to do is use a multi-stage design. And specifically the second stage rocket engine is designed for use at high altitudes, where the first stage is designed for low altitudes because it does the initial liftoff. And so they intentionally made it so that at sea level it would be an expanded nozzle, but then by the time it gets to higher altitudes, then it's working more optimally. So that balance of being able to use those side boosters of one shape and also one type of fuel, and then the liquid fuel plus the other type of nozzle shape was some of the secret sauce involved in that. And so then you end up with what I think are some of the coolest engines. Fractals, is this? No, not this one. Okay, so this sort of nozzle then is the one that's on the space shuttle. All right, so we just spent, what, 15 minutes talking about rockets and how they work. What do you think about watching a video of an actual rocket taking off? We'll do one better. We just learned all about the space shuttle. Let's watch the actual space shuttle take off. So look for all the different things we talked about. We have that solid fuel that's going to burn hot and first and then drop off, and then the liquid fuel that goes later, and different nozzle shapes for different part of the launch. All right, pretty cool. I hope you liked that as much as I enjoyed watching it. It's something about rockets. I don't know, just love them. Wow, right? Yeah. All right, so, and here we are now in White Sands National Park, and the White Sands Missile Range is just up to our north here. So looking around really quick here, we're just over, and actually I'm going to do a little pause here and kind of circle the plane so we can look at this. The dunes in the game are okay. The sand isn't great, but it's still pretty fun to look at. So you can see kind of off in the distance, right over here, this is the trail that goes. So there's a actual drive you can do, and then there's some camping and hiking trails that come off of here too. So you're really in the heart of the sand dunes though when you go down this way. And this is where you could also go sledding. All right. Oops. Hop back in our plane and keep going here. I do feel like every time I watch the rocket video, that I've seen that a couple times now, every time I watch it, it like gets my heart going. Just something about rockets, right? Oh. Okay, so rockets have a propellant and the nozzle. The propellant needs to work in space, unlike a jet engine. The nozzle directs the exhaust to drive as much possible thrust, propelling the rocket forward. So, in a nutshell, there you go. Very cool. I missed the shuttle. I was at JPL Solar System Ambassador from 2007 to 2018. Volunteer Educational Outreach Program promotes space and astronomy. Flying Singer, I feel like you probably have some, first of all, you probably have some really good stories, but also like feel free to throw out any other fun facts or information for this. We're going to go visit the White Sands Space Harbor, which is, it sounds like was a pretty cool destination. Oh, speaking of visiting all of these, educational outreach program, volunteer educational outreach program, that the educational outreach program sounds like a similar kind of program that a lot of the some of the park rangers call themselves educational park rangers, which I don't exactly know the distinction that makes it that, but I really like that idea. It sounds like a really cool place to be and just kind of tell people about space and astronomy and stuff. All right, let me quick pull up a couple of these because I wanted to show, this is an aerial view of the field just so you can get a sense of what it looks like. A bit grainy, but just so you have an idea. There's the edge of where you can drive your car. Quick close-up of the sand dunes. So this is what it looks like, not in a video game. Another one, this is a little bit more rippled view. You can see some of the vegetation off here, which all has very interesting stories to it. Okay, they have space, shuttle, minulators. Just a free space shuttle simulator called Orbiter demonstrates shuttle launches, space station docking, moon landings, more fun with kids than PowerPoint. Yeah, I bet. I feel like we should have a national park on the moon, and then we could do a launch to the moon. Space shuttle simulators around the country. So okay, same thing Flyer Singer was talking about. Very cool. How do you steer a rocket? John, great question. I am not well enough educated in that to give you a great answer. I know that one of the principles with a rocket is you don't need to steer it necessarily, in that you angle it in the direction that you want it to go, and you know how much thrust you're going to generate, and you know the general arc it's going to follow. I know that they do a bit more with sort of the design of the fins that come off of it, and then they'll do things with, I think they can also change the direction of the nozzle and some other things like that. Yeah, there's a lot more to it. You can also do things with gyroscopes spinning, and that would be my 2 cents on it from a week's worth of kind of learning about these things. It was a good question. There's I'm sure a whole lot more to the art of steering a rocket. Booster, you don't whatsoever. Single booster, double booster can be throttled depending on the fuel type, plus nozzle changes. There you go. Thanks, Freckles. All right, keep our flight going here. So nozzle and propellant. I was thinking about ways to apply this to your daily life, and yeah, you all probably know that I like to end each section with a little joke. And I was having trouble coming up with a good one for rockets. One of the things that you could think about if you're interested in rockets, you can go and build model rockets, build rockets to launch on your own, which is a fun kind of hobby to go. But in place of a joke today, I kind of want to go in a different direction, which is I want to make a claim that we're all kind of built to be astronauts. And why do I say that? Well, we evolve our bodies to be able to function in zero gravity environments. So we can actually live in a space station orbiting the Earth, which is pretty weird when you think about it, because we evolved on Earth where we would have had access to gravity for things, especially like digestion, right? You eat something and you could rely on gravity to pull it down through your esophagus, maybe. I'm sure there's someone with more medical background who can tell me why that would never work, but we're going to go with it for the poetry of the situation. So we live in this 1G environment, but we evolved in such a way that we can live in 0G. So if you think about your esophagus, the way that it pulls food down is it sort of like rhythmically moves it all the way down into your stomach. And what that means is that if you go into a place without gravity, your esophagus still works. You can still eat things. And so we're actually able to go into space where there's zero gravity and not have to deal with a problem like, how are we going to make food go down our throats? So, right? So it's pretty weird that we would evolve in that way, given that we all live on Earth where we do have gravity. So what does this mean to me? It means that the next time that you've got a really good burp coming, just remember that it's the same esophagus that it's coming from that is your golden ticket to life in space. So let that burp ride, and remind all your friends that you, too, could live in space one day. And good on you, future astronaut. Okay, I kind of lied. I did have a little bit of a joke. It just had a long preamble, and it wasn't super related to rockets, but that's okay. Puzzle, gimbaling, pivoted nozzle to direct thrust. Many boosters do this, including SpaceX Falcon X, the flyback and land. Flying Singer, I was hoping you would jump in. Yeah, okay. Plus gimbaling, pivoting nozzle, and directed thrust. I feel like the SpaceX Falcon 9, I remember seeing them do some pretty fancy maneuvers on it. Oh, very cool. Visual. Oh, thank you. I've been showing the dunes. Okay. How are we for time? 7:45. All right, so we'll do a very quick version on our person of the week. So, and I lovingly call him the opposite of talking about rockets. So, person of the week this week is Herbert Hoover, and he was the 31st president of the United States from 1929 to 1933. He's related to the park because he's the one who designated it a national monument. So that's why I wanted to pick him for this week. He was a member of the Republican Party. He held office during the onset of the Great Depression. And before serving as president, he led the Commission for Relief in Belgium, serving as the director of the U.S. Food Administration, and served as the third U.S. Secretary of Commerce. I have a little bit more information here. He's a fascinating character, and he came 2 presidents after... excuse me, make sure I got my notes right. Yes. So this is sort of Warren G. Harding, you might remember from the Harding Ice Field. He won the Republican nomination in 2019, and then immediately afterwards the stock market crashed, and so most of his presidency was dealing with the Great Depression. He was opposed to directly involving the federal government in relief efforts. And so when it came time for re-election in 1932, then he lost to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. After leaving office, he had one of the longest retirements of any presidents. And he managed to sort of re-establish his legacy during that kind of post-presidency phase. He's widely regarded as kind of in the bottom third of presidents of all time, but he was able to get a little bit of that credibility back after his time as president. All right, let me pop out of the plane real quick here. So we are flying over a very cool part of, and this is where that scenery fix that I mentioned really comes in handy, because there's a bunch of random buildings for some reason here. Not in real life, but just in the game. So you can kind of see, if I pause here, you can see off in the distance, there's this, it looks like a runway kind of on the sand. And if you get close, and even if you don't get close, I mean, the runway is enormous. And so what is that, you would ask? That is the White Sands Space Harbor. Let me pull this up real quick. this is what that looks like. So the White Sands Space Harbor was a alternate landing site for the space shuttle. It was only used once, but they got a photo of it when it was used there. So this is the picture of when the Space Shuttle Columbia landed at this airstrip that we are on. So I was prepping for the stream. I'll flip back to back. We didn't leave it up very long. I was prepping for the stream. I did a landing on the space shuttle runway and had a pretty good time. Actually, it was very fun. Very big runway for a little plane like what I have. But neat throwback to history. Okay, so that's what also part of the reason I want to talk about rockets is because of that landing. All right, let's keep our flight going here. So we are out of the park. There's a couple more destinations we'll just kind of idly fly over and around. But this is the majority of the park is behind us now off. That way we're sort of in the White Sands missile range. All right, Fractals, you want to take us into our last topic for the evening? Do a quick time check. We got about 10 minutes, and we have so much fascinating stuff to talk about with this one. So the topic is moths and butterflies and silkworms. The reason to choose moths is there are 60 species of moth in White Sands that are unique to this park. And it's so much of a thing here that they have a local moth expert, and they host a Mothapalooza every year. Fun fact from that moth expert in a video I watched of his, it turns out 10% of all plants and animals on Earth are moths. So, there you go. Let me quick pull up this one. Now we'll talk about moths and butterflies together, and that's related to this poll. What is the difference between a moth and a butterfly? First one I know when I see it. It's very hard to detangle them, but thin antennas with a ball/club at the end is a good general rule. Or a moth evolves into Venomoth, and a butterfly evolves into Butterfree. Duh. All right, give people a second to vote. So this is the first moth that was discovered in White Sands. It's named after White Sands. If you look at the scientific name here, it's White Sandsinus. So this is the first one of the 60 that I mentioned. So I'll give people just a second to respond to the poll, and then I'll tell you the answer to it, which is maybe self-explanatory. I feel like I make these polls too easy sometimes. So what is the difference between a moth and a butterfly? A moth is defined as all members of a particular order, Lepidoptera. I don't think I said that right. But it's defined as all members of that order that are not butterflies. So it's defined as anything that isn't a butterfly, which isn't a really great definition. And moths make up the vast majority of that order. There are thought to be approximately 160,000 species of moth, most of which have not yet been described. Most species of moth are active at night, though, and butterflies are typically active. Most species of moth are active at night, but there are a couple that are active in twilight or day. You'll find that in all the moth and butterfly discussions, it's sort of like, here's the general rule, but also here's a list of exceptions. All right, Fractals, you want to throw that poll result up? I know when I see it, 2 votes. It's fair, yep. 3 votes for the ball club antenna, which is the correct answer on this one. And then Venomoth and Butterfree, I had to go for the Pokemon reference, yeah. For 1 vote, yeah. That was probably what I would have chosen. But it is the club and antenna. So how can you tell a butterfly and a moth apart? One good guiding principle is that butterflies have a thin antenna and small balls or clubs at the end of their antenna. Most moth antennae are usually feathery with no ball at the end. So if I pull up a butterfly, I mean, if you don't like moths, I would ask that you give them a second chance, but also I'll let you know if I'm going to pull up moth photos, because sometimes, I don't know, people don't like them. So there's a butterfly, and you can see a little ball at the end and the thin antenna here. I'll pull up a moth photo now. Okay, and you'll see the moth then, it has this kind of feathery antenna and no ball at the end. That's one good way to tell them apart. Another thing that is useful, almost all butterflies are diurnal, are out in the day, and have relatively bright colors. They also hold their wings vertically above their bodies at rest. So you've probably seen that. They hold them kind of closed up like that. Whereas the majority of moths fly at night. They're usually cryptically colored, and then they usually hold their wings flat, touching the surface of whatever they're landing on, like a tree or something, or they'll kind of fold them in along their sides. Again, those aren't hard rules, but that's kind of some tips that you can use to tell them apart. But because they're so similar, we can talk about them together. While I start talking a little bit about the life cycle of butterflies and moths, does anyone have a particular favorite butterfly? I know mine is there's a butterfly. I should look up the name, but it's the one with the blue wing, the blue butterfly wings. They're just this gorgeous color of blue. Oops, which also happens to be. I close my eyes while flying a plane. Don't do that. Gorgeous color of blue though, which happens to be one of my favorite colors. Let's see, monarch fractals. Yep, HW monarch. Monarch's a good one. Monarchs are fascinating. All right. So first we have an egg, and the egg lasts a few weeks in most butterflies. Next, there's a caterpillar. Probably recognize a caterpillar. This is the larva. It consumes plant leaves and basically spends its whole time looking for food. From there, it turns into a pupa. When the larva's fully grown, certain hormones start to be produced, and then it begins to wander looking for a suitable place to go and to go through pupation. Usually an underside of a leaf or a concealed location. It'll spin a little button of silk and fasten itself to the surface, and then shed its skin one last time to get to a hard skin called a chrysalis. So this is what a chrysalis looks like. It's kind of that final shedding. Stacy, most of them. Yeah, that's fair. I also like most butterflies. Now, a chrysalis is not a cocoon, although they're often intermixed. So a chrysalis would be this sort of thing. This is the hard figure. A monarch actually forms a chrysalis. A cocoon, though, is a casing spun of silk that protects the pupa. So a cocoon, this is an open cocoon. You can see the silk on the left here, and then the chrysalis on the right here. Or the pupa, at least on the right here. I don't know if it's the chrysalis, if it's around the cocoon. So I mentioned that this is silk. So that silk is from a silkworm, which is actually a moth larva. So if you ever wonder where silk comes from, it's the cocoon of a moth larva that it produces. So it looks sort of like this when it's created, and then you can unravel it. You just find the end and unravel the whole thing, and you get silk. So that's a silkworm. The cocoon of it is what gets produced here. Cocoon is made of thread of raw silk of about 1,000 to 3,000 feet long. The fibers are very fine and lustrous, and they're shaped like a prism. And so the reason that you get that kind of shimmery appearance is because that triangular prism, just like, Dark Side of the Moon, that structure creates sort of a refraction that's hard to capture. And so that kind of gives it a little bit of different colors on it. Fractals. I gotta preview the joke word. A guy goes to a cardiologist and says, "I think I'm a moth." The doctor says, "I think you should see a psychiatrist. Why are you visiting me?" The guy says, "'Cause your lights were on." Good one, Fractals. I should have known you'd have a moth joke ready to go. That's funny. All right, so back to a chrysalis. Goes through chrysalis, and then it goes through metamorphosis, and then finishes in the adult stage, which is the moth or the butterfly. That adult stage is the reproductive part of its life. There's a little bit on eating. We'll skip over. The other piece of it that's interesting is butterflies especially have a bunch of different, and moths have a bunch of different defenses. One of them is that they can eat toxins in plants and then hold them in their bodies to become toxic to animals that they get eaten. But if they get eaten, the butterfly's still dead, so you need some way to tell animals that if they eat you, you're going to poison them. They do this with bright coloring. And so you might have noticed like a poison dart frog has that same sort of bright coloring. This is a way of warning that it's toxic if you eat me. If you're a butterfly, though, and you have this sort of bright coloring, you probably want to maximize that sort of defense. And so there's two ways that you can do this, two primary ways. Both of these are forms of mimicry. So there's the Batesian mimicry, which is a form of mimicry where a harmless species evolves to look like a harmful species so that you stay away from it. I sometimes see this with like flies that look like wasps, where I don't want to go near a wasp, but if it's just a fly, I don't really mind, but they look the same. That would be a type of Batesian mimicry. In the case of butterflies, this is some examples of that. So there's pairs of two here, so you get these two are Batesian mimicries of each other. Another kind of mimicry that you get is Mullerian mimicry, which is a natural phenomenon where two or more well-defended species, like for instance toxic, evolve to have the same sort of coloration so that other predators know that you shouldn't eat this entire group of species. So unlike Batesian, where one of them is kind of pretending to be toxic, in the Mullerian, they're actually all toxic, but they're using the same coloring so that it's easier for prey to get it right. Like, you don't want to eat these. So this is a Mullerian evolution. These are all different species, again, pairs of two. But they're all toxic. They evolved to look similar so that the prey knows better than to eat them. I'm caught up with 758 here. That's it, mother. We'll wrap up. Thank you, Fractal. So Fractal start doing the closeout piece here. There's a lava flow that we'll come up to. And then for anyone doing the flight plan, the last stop on here is actually Trinity Site, which isn't super interesting in the game, but it's kind of a cool thing relative to the White Sands missile range to know where that is. The other defense mechanism they often use is camouflage, especially caterpillars kind of look like leaves or stems. Let me pull up one last thing. Okay, so in summary, this is a butterfly wing up close. It has these little scales, which if you've never seen is pretty interesting. So that's what that looks like. That's why you don't want to touch a butterfly wing. You could ruin the scales. So in summary, moths and butterflies are very similar. A good rule of thumb to distinguish them is butterfly have thin antennae and little balls at the end. Both animals started as eggs, then larvae, then pupa in their adult form. Only some produce cocoons, and some of these cocoons are harvested for their silk. And remember, next time you're about to get in a bar fight, sometimes the tattoos and arm spikes are Batesian mimicry, but sometimes it's Mullerian mimicry. And honestly, it's best not to mix those two up. Or you might quickly learn why moths often prefer just to stick with camouflage. That's a science joke for you. There's not very many places you can use that kind of joke. All right, thanks, Fractal. So why don't you post up the vote for the next, exactly, read my mind. So options for the next park, go ahead and vote for where you'd like to go and explore together next. So there's Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, there's Mount Rainier National Park, and then Lake Clark National Park. So last time it was all sort of parks related to dunes. These ones are all parks that relate to volcanoes, of which Lake Clark is kind of a fascinating sort of curveball in there. It's an Alaskan. And while people vote, we're at 8 o'clock here. So today we talked about White Sands National Park. We talked a little bit about Herbert Hoover. We also covered rockets. We got a little bit of insight from, was it Flying Singer? I totally forgot what's going up in this one, on kind of how the rockets work and a bit more of the background there. So thank you, Flying Singer. And then we talked a little bit about moths and butterflies. Fractal's posted up that survey. I do use that to improve the show, so thank you very much for taking time to give feedback and suggestions. If you want to come hang out in the Discord community, we'll talk about national parks, hang out. I post up emojis related to the park, which is kind of fun to use. And yeah, that's sort of it. There's a big lava flow, actually a ginormous lava flow. Show that on here. All right, what's the poll results here? Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Visited top of Mauna Kea in 2014. Looks says great models of these observations. Hey, okay, Flying Singer, good tip, thank you. And it looks like we're going to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. So that'll work out well. So I will see you all next week and we'll explore Hawaii Volcanoes National Park together. So with that, thank you all for being my co-pilot today. Until we meet again, stay curious and keep on exploring. See you all next week.